Hello and welcome to this Pod-Vid on officers in Fight Your Own Battles. Let's start by looking at what we mean by officers. First and foremost, we have what are referred to in the rules as an NCO. Now an NCO is really a junior officer, and you can put him in whatever situation you like. I mean, our NCOs typically lead a platoon of infantry. They could be in charge of a crew serve weapon, a tank, or even an aircraft, but we call them NCOs. If you want to use the phrase junior officer, you can, but essentially that's what an NCO is. The next grade up is a company officer, or a CO, and a company officer does exactly that. So it's an infantry company or a squadron of tanks led by a CO. Again, generic term, and we use in the rules. Now the next level up obviously is a battalion or the equivalent commander. We tend to refer to those as senior officers. Now when we first start playing our solo games, we're going to play with some relatively small forces, so I doubt that we're going to come across a senior officer, but you really ought to know that we do have senior officers. We also have an upper level, which is brigade officers and divisional officers. Now it's highly unlikely you're going to come across those until really we get into Fight Your Own Wars, and then quite rarely, but just to let you know that these grades do exist. And obviously, having described who they are, it's quite obvious what they do. I've said the NCO would lead an element on the table. He makes his decisions using the order priority card, which we'll come on to. That's the order in which the elements are activated on the table, or he's activated by a player in the two-player game. But from going forward, I'm going to talk specifically now about playing solo. So if our NCO wants to do something, he needs to pass an officer reaction test. We'll come on to that, and he'll be told what to do by the order dice, and we'll come on to that as well. The company officer, the CO, is activated by his own order priority card, and when he gets activated, he's allowed to give orders or change orders. He can do some morale rallying. He can share information around his NCOs that he's been told, perhaps where the enemy might be. He can replace an NCO if one's become a casualty, all that kind of stuff. That all happens when the CO is activated. I'll mention very briefly, but we'll come on to it much later on when there's another video coming about personalised wargaming. But the COs, and certainly the senior officers in my army, are named Smith, Brown, Jones, whatever. So you can actually give your little soldiers some characters. Now my convention is that my British officers are named after horticultural things. So I've got a Hedges, and I might have Major Rose, or I might have a Captain Hawthorne, those sort of words. And my German officers are named after using the German words for animals. So I've got somebody like General Haifisch, Haifisch being a shark, and I've got Hauptmann Welpe, Welpe being the German word for a puppy. So I tend to use those conventions, helps me to name my leaders. Now our NCOs and our COs, and in fact our senior officers, are all given a rating as to how good they are. And we talked in the last video about disruptors and your officers doing their own thing depending on how good, bad or indifferent they are. Now obviously you would expect your more elite and veteran commanders to be better than your Joe averages. So the ratings are sorted out by dice throw, and if they're in charge of an elite or a veteran unit, they get a +1 to the dice throw. So if they are poor, green, rubbishy troops, then you deduct 1 from the throw. So you can see that your officers can be rated from 0 to 7 on a D6. And very simply, an officer who scores 0 is described as weak. If you get 1, he's described as cautious. Those ranked 2 to 5 are just regular guys. 6 is bold and 7 is inspirational. We'll come on to what that means in a little while, and they're given ratings. So weak is 0, cautious 1, regular 2, bold 3 and inspirational 4. And you'll find out what those ratings mean when we come to making decisions, because those rating numbers are used to help make decisions. The senior officers are also ranked. Now you would expect the higher up the tree you go, the more decent your officers are going to be. So if you throw a 1 on a d6, you get a below average rating 5. 2 to 5 is average, rating 6. And if you throw a 6, he's above average, rated 7. So that's basically how our officers are rated. And I'll mention very quickly, as we'll come across in the games and when we start to play them, you'll see that from time to time your officers might need to take what we call a leadership test. And this is where that rating that we just mentioned comes in. So let's say you've got a regular NCO, his rating is a 2. If he wants to take a decision, then he needs to pass his leadership test. And to do that, you throw a d6, and you've got to get less than your rating plus 3. So that means that a regular NCO needs to get less than a 5, a bold needs to get less than a 6, a cautious guy needs to get less than a 4. So you can see that if you want to make a decision, the better officers, it's easier to make. And that's all I'm going to say for now about officers. We've worked out for our force on the table, we've got NCOs and officers as we see fit. There's always got to be some kind of commanding officer on the table. Orders obviously come from him and go through him. So we'll have, in our little game, we'll have a CO, and we'll probably have 1 or 2 NCOs on each side when our game starts, and we simply rank them right at the start of the game by throwing a d6. You'll find later on in the campaign version that once they get their ratings, they stick with their ratings, but for now we'll throw a dice, we'll get the ratings set up, and then we can get into playing the game. Before we start though, we need to understand how the game is played, and that's called game flow. All rules have a game flow, what you do first, what you do second, and so on. That's what we're looking at next. Stick around for that. I'll see you soon. Look, you know how this works. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and when more stuff arrives, you'll be the first to know.